They laughed at what she built. They said it looked like something a child would make with scraps and desperation. They said a woman like her, alone with a daughter barely old enough to tie her own shoes and a dog too old to be useful, had no business pretending she could protect anyone from a winter that fierce. But when the blizzard came, when the wind screamed and the world disappeared beneath walls of white, when survival became a question with only one answer, the joke stopped being funny, and the shelter they mocked became the line between life and death. Her name was Sarah, though most people in the valley simply called her that woman from the ridge. She had moved there in early September, after the summer had burned itself out, and the first hints of autumn crisped the air. She arrived in a battered van loaded with supplies, her daughter Maya sitting quietly in the passenger seat, and a graying border collie mix named Scout in the back, his muzzle flecked with white but his eyes still sharp and alert. Sarah had purchased land on the ridge overlooking the valley, a windswept stretch of rocky soil that no farmer wanted and no developer could justify. It was exposed, barren, and unforgiving. The real estate agent had warned her that winters there were brutal, that the wind came down from the mountains with relentless force, that most sensible people avoided building on the ridge altogether. Sarah had nodded politely, signed the papers, and driven up the dirt path without looking back. If you're enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The valley below was dotted with sturdy farmhouses, ranches, and a small cluster of homes that made up the closest thing to a town within 20 miles. The people who lived there were practical, hardworking, and deeply skeptical of outsiders, especially outsiders who made choices they couldn't understand. And Sarah's choices baffled them from the start. She didn't rent a place in town while she built. She didn't hire contractors or ask for advice. She simply began constructing what would become her shelter, working alone except for Maya, who was 6 years old and small for her age, and Scout, whose joints creaked when he stood but whose loyalty never wavered. The shelter Sarah built was unlike anything the valley had seen. It was low to the ground, barely taller than a person, partially dug into the hillside itself. The walls were made from stacked stones she hauled from the surrounding land, reinforced with timber and packed earth. The roof was a patchwork of corrugated metal, thick plastic sheeting, and sod she layered on top for insulation. There were no windows, only small ventilation gaps near the roofline covered with mesh. The entrance was a narrow tunnel that curved inward, designed to block wind and trap heat. To the people in the valley it looked like a joke, a crude, desperate attempt at shelter by someone who clearly didn't know what she was doing. They saw a woman with dirt under her nails and exhaustion in her eyes, dragging stones across the ridge while her daughter played nearby, and her dog watched. They saw something that resembled a bunker, a burrow, a hole in the ground dressed up as a home. And they laughed. At the feed store, men joked that she was building a tomb. At the diner, women whispered that someone should call Child Protective Services, because no child should live like that. The local mechanic, a man named Dale who had lived in the valley his entire life, told anyone who would listen that Sarah's shelter wouldn't last a week once winter hit. The ridge, he said, was a wind tunnel. Anything built there would be torn apart or buried. It was common knowledge. Everyone knew it. But Sarah kept working. She reinforced the walls with additional layers of stone. She dug drainage channels around the perimeter to divert water and snowmelt. She installed a small wood-burning stove, with a chimney that vented through the roof at an angle designed to prevent backdraft. She stockpiled firewood, covering it with tarps weighted down with rocks. She gathered supplies, dried food, stored water in heavy containers she buried partially in the ground to keep them from freezing solid. Maya helped in the ways a 6-year-old could. She carried small stones. She fetched tools. She sang songs to Scout, who lay in the shade and watched over her with the patience of an old guardian who had seen many seasons. The girl never complained about the dust or the heat or the strange new life they were building. She trusted her mother with the unquestioning faith that children have before the world teaches them doubt. Sarah rarely spoke to the people in the valley. When she came down to buy supplies, she was polite but distant. She didn't explain herself. She didn't defend her choices. She simply paid for what she needed and drove back up the ridge, leaving the townspeople to their speculations and judgments. By late October, the shelter was finished. It looked rough, primitive, like something from another era. But it was solid. Sarah had tested every joint, every seal, every support beam. She had learned long ago, in places far from this valley, that survival wasn't about comfort or appearances. It was about function, preparation, and the willingness to do what others wouldn't. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that melted by noon. The valley adapted easily, turning on furnaces and stocking up on groceries. Life continued as it always had, predictable and routine, but Sarah didn't relax. She added more firewood to her stacks. She checked and rechecked her supplies. She taught Maya how to dress in layers, how to conserve heat, how to stay calm when the wind howled. She brushed Scout's thick coat and made sure he had a warm place to sleep near the stove. The people in the valley watched the smoke rising from the shelter's chimney and shook their heads. Some felt pity. Some felt contempt. A few felt a nagging unease, though they couldn't quite say why. But no one reached out. No one offered help. Because in their minds, Sarah had made her bed. And if that bed was a hole in the ground on a frozen ridge, well, that was her problem. By mid-November, the weather began to shift. The old-timers felt it in their bones, a heaviness in the air, a strange stillness before the storm. They mentioned it at the post office and the hardware store. But younger folks dismissed it as superstition. Weather forecasts predicted snow, yes, but nothing catastrophic. The valley had weathered storms before. They would weather this one too. Sarah felt it too. She felt it in the way Scout's ears went flat at night, in the way the wind changed pitch, in the way the sky looked at dusk, heavy and bruised. She knew that feeling. She had felt it before, in other places, other winters. It was the feeling of something inevitable approaching, something that couldn't be reasoned with or avoided, only prepared for. She brought Maya inside earlier each evening. She made sure the stove was always burning, low and steady. She told Maya stories about women who survived impossible things, about the importance of staying calm, about trusting the shelter they had built together. Maya listened, her small face serious, her hand resting on Scout's warm fur. On the night of November 23rd, the blizzard arrived. It didn't ease in gradually or give warning. It came like a wall, sudden and absolute. The wind rose to a scream, a sound so loud and constant it seemed to erase all other noise. Snow fell so thick and fast that visibility dropped to zero within minutes. The temperature plummeted, not gradually but in a brutal drop that turned breath to ice and made exposed skin burn. In the valley, people scrambled. They closed shutters and locked doors. They turned up thermostats and gathered blankets. But this wasn't a normal storm. This was something older, something primal. The wind didn't just blow, it attacked. It tore shingles from roofs and ripped siding from walls. It found every crack, every gap, every weakness in structures built with modern convenience, but not with true resilience. Power lines snapped under the weight of ice and the force of wind. Transformers exploded in bright flashes that briefly lit the whiteout before plunging the valley into darkness. Within an hour, electricity was gone. Within 2 hours, the cold began to invade homes built to rely on electric heat, on systems that required power to function. Families huddled together, burning what they could in fireplaces many hadn't cleaned in years. Smoke backed up into living rooms. Carbon monoxide alarms screamed until their batteries died. Pipes began to freeze and burst, flooding homes with water that quickly turned to ice. Cars wouldn't start. Phones died. The roads disappeared beneath drifts so high they swallowed fences and mailboxes. Panic set in as the hours stretched into a night that seemed endless. People who had never questioned their safety, who had built their lives on the assumption that systems would work and help would come, realized they were alone. Truly alone. And utterly unprepared. Dale, the mechanic who had mocked Sarah's shelter, tried to keep his family warm in his garage, running a generator that sputtered and died when the fuel ran out. His wife held their 2 young sons, all of them shivering beneath every blanket they owned, while Dale cursed and tried to restart the machine with numb fingers. At the diner, the owner, a woman named Carol, and 3 customers who had been caught there when the storm hit, huddled in the kitchen, burning wood from broken furniture in a trash can, the smoke making them cough and cry. They couldn't leave. The world outside was white chaos, impossible to navigate. In a farmhouse at the edge of the valley, an elderly couple sat in their dark living room, wrapped in coats and scarves, their breath visible in the air. Their heater had stopped working hours ago. Their fireplace was decorative, never meant for real use. They held hands and waited, unsure for what. And on the ridge, in the shelter they had called a joke, Sarah kept her family warm. The wind screamed over the low profile of the structure, unable to find purchase, unable to tear it apart. The thick walls and the earth packed around them held the cold at bay. The stove burned steadily, fed by the firewood Sarah had stockpiled. The curved entrance tunnel blocked the wind entirely, creating an airlock that trapped heat inside. Maya slept on a padded mat near the stove, wrapped in blankets, her breathing soft and even. Scout lay beside her, his body a second source of warmth, his presence a constant reassurance. Sarah sat near the entrance, listening to the storm, monitoring the stove, checking supplies. She didn't sleep. She couldn't afford to. But she wasn't afraid. She had built for this. She had prepared for this. And now, as the blizzard raged, her preparation proved itself. Hours passed. The storm didn't ease. If anything, it intensified, as if nature itself were testing everything in its path, sorting the strong from the weak, the prepared from the arrogant. In the valley, desperation reached a breaking point. Dale remembered the woman on the ridge, the one they had mocked, the one whose shelter looked like a joke. And he wondered, with a sick feeling in his stomach, if maybe she had known something they didn't. He told his wife he was going for help. She begged him not to, but he saw the way his sons were shivering, the way their lips were turning blue. He wrapped himself in every layer he could find, tied a rope around his waist anchored to the garage, and stepped into the blizzard. The wind hit him like a physical blow. He could barely stand. He could barely breathe. The snow was so thick he couldn't see his own hands. But he moved forward, pulled by desperation and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, the woman on the ridge could help. Others had the same thought. Carol from the diner, the elderly couple, a young mother with a baby. One by one, driven by the primal need to survive, they began moving through the blizzard toward the ridge. Some followed landmarks they could barely see. Some simply followed instinct. Some got lost and were found by others, and together they pressed on. It took hours. Some fell and had to be helped up. Some wanted to turn back, but knew there was nothing to return to. And slowly, impossibly, they made their way up the ridge toward the shelter that had been a punchline just days before. Sarah heard them before she saw them. The sound of voices calling out, muffled by wind and snow. She opened the entrance and saw shapes in the whiteout, figures bent against the storm, desperate and freezing. She didn't hesitate. She called out, guiding them in, pulling them through the entrance tunnel one by one. They stumbled into the shelter, snow-covered and shaking violently, barely able to stand. Sarah moved quickly, methodically. She stripped off their wet outer layers and wrapped them in blankets. She positioned them near the stove. She boiled water and made them drink, warming them from the inside. She checked for frostbite, for hypothermia, for injuries. Maya woke and watched with wide eyes as the shelter filled with people. Scout moved among them, his calm presence soothing, his body warm against those who needed it most. The shelter, which had seemed so small, somehow held them all. Not comfortably, but adequately. Enough. Dale sat near the stove, his hands wrapped around a cup of hot water, tears streaming down his face. Not from the cold, but from shame and gratitude, and the crushing realization of how wrong he had been. Carol stared at the walls, at the careful construction, at the design that had seemed so primitive, but was actually brilliant. The elderly couple held each other and cried softly, alive when they had been certain they would die. Sarah didn't speak much. She didn't need to. She moved among them, tending to their needs, rationing her supplies to make sure everyone had enough. She didn't ask for apologies. She didn't demand recognition. She simply did what needed to be done, the same way she had done everything else, with quiet competence and unshakable resolve. The blizzard raged for 2 more days. 2 days of howling wind and blinding snow and cold that killed anything caught outside. But inside the shelter, life persisted. Sarah kept the fire going. She rationed food and water. She told stories to keep spirits up. She made sure Maya felt safe, that Scout was cared for, that everyone understood they would survive. And they did. When the storm finally passed, and the sun emerged over a landscape transformed into an alien world of white, the people in the shelter emerged slowly, blinking in the light, alive because of a woman they had called foolish. The valley was devastated. Homes were damaged. Some were destroyed. The cleanup would take weeks, but the people who had sheltered on the ridge were alive, and they knew, with a certainty that would stay with them forever, that they owed their lives to Sarah. In the days that followed, the jokes stopped. The mockery died. In its place came a quiet respect, a recognition that strength doesn't always look the way people expect. That wisdom sometimes wears the face of a quiet woman with dirt under her nails and a child by her side. Dale returned with supplies he could spare, unable to meet Sarah's eyes, the weight of his past words heavy on his shoulders. Carol organized a collection to help Sarah expand her shelter if she wanted, though Sarah politely declined. The elderly couple visited once, just to say thank you, to touch the walls that had saved them, to understand. Sarah accepted their gratitude with the same quiet grace she had accepted their judgment. She didn't hold grudges. She didn't need vindication. She had done what she set out to do. She had protected her daughter. She had survived. And in doing so, she had saved others. The shelter still stood on the ridge, low and solid, a testament to preparation and foresight. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't conventional. But it worked. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Sarah sat outside on a clear evening, weeks after the blizzard, with Maya beside her and Scout at her feet. They looked out over the valley, at the lights beginning to return, at the life slowly rebuilding itself. Maya leaned against her mother, warm and safe, and asked if they would stay. Sarah looked at the shelter they had built, at the land they had claimed, at the valley that had doubted them, and then depended on them. And she nodded. Yes, they would stay. Because this was home now. Not because it was easy, but because they had made it theirs. Because they had proven, to themselves more than anyone, that they could survive anything. The wind rose, cool and steady, carrying the scent of snow from the distant mountains. But Sarah didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that you can't stop the wind. You can only build strong enough to withstand it. And she had done exactly that. The shelter was no longer a joke. It was a monument, a reminder, a quiet answer to the question that haunts every person who has ever been doubted. What happens when you trust yourself even when no one else does? What happens is you survive. And sometimes, you save others along the way. Sarah pulled Maya closer, felt Scout's warmth against her leg, and smiled. Not in triumph, but in peace. Because she had done enough. She had been enough. And that knowledge, earned through preparation and perseverance and the courage to ignore the laughter, was worth more than any apology the valley could offer. The blizzard had decided who was right, and now everyone knew. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps us bring you more stories about courage, resilience, and the power of trusting yourself. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that could inspire you. And leave a comment below. Have you ever prepared for something everyone said was unnecessary, only to be proven right? Share your experience with us. Thank you for being here. Your support means everything.